Welcome to the Beer Before Glory podcast. I'm Justin Crosley.
And I'm Matt Brynolson.
And we are back with episode 4, another in our exciting series on beer. Well, at least we get excited about it. And we're definitely excited about this one because we get to drink and talk German beer, German lager, German hops. With not a German, but I do believe he's an honorary German at this point. Our guest today is Eric Toft, and he's from Schönram Brewery. Did I get that close, Eric?
That's close enough. That's fine, yeah.
Schönram. Yeah. Where's the brewery at, Eric?
We're in the very southeast of Bavaria.
Okay.
Bordered very close to the border on two sides of the border of Austria, and just a little bit to the northwest of the city of Salzburg, Austria.
Okay.
So
beautiful.
For people who know Munich, we're southeast of Munich, about 80 miles.
Okay, got it. Beautiful region there. I've been multiple times through my career, and you're not from Germany. You're actually, I believe, from Wyoming, right?
That's correct. Yeah. From Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Is that where you are now?
That's
okay.
where I'm now. Yeah.
Yeah, we got lucky because when I first talked to Eric about this, we're going to have this 9-hour difference, and one of us was going to be either suffering early in the morning or late at night. So we really got lucky and caught Eric on holiday, and he was so kind to jump on board. And I must add, I am so pumped for this conversation because I'm a longtime fan of Eric's work, and not so long ago I got to visit and spend some time right there at the source. And oh my gosh, these beers are incredible.
Thanks, Matt.
I can't wait
That means a lot.
When travel is allowed again, I can't wait to go try some of this. But at least we get to talk about it today. And, I guess, Eric, I just wanted to start with how it is that you've ended up in Germany brewing. And I believe you've been there for something like 30 years now, right?
Yeah, I went to Germany in 1987, just after I finished my bachelor's, with the intent of trying to go to brewing school and then come back and start up my own brewery. So I did all that. I didn't start my own brewery. I studied geophysics in Colorado, right next door to the Coors Brewing Company. So I started in 1983 and started homebrewing in 1984. And of course, this was the time when little breweries started to open up. There was a Boulder Brewing Company, and of course, Sierra Nevada had already opened up in 1979. And in the Pacific Northwest, primarily, there were some breweries opening up. Yeah, and so through my home brewing, I really got into just beer in general and the brewing process. And when I was finished with my studies, I was faced with the option of going to the oil fields of Saudi Arabia, which is not why I got into geophysics. I wanted to spend the time in the mountains, mapping and looking for rocks. That's sort of how I imagine my life as a geophysicist. So rather than go to Saudi Arabia, I've decided to start my own brewery. But rather than, instead of just starting up a place as a novice brewer, I decided to give Germany a shot, because I figured if you can learn the trade anywhere in the world, it would be Germany. Mm-hmm. And to learn it from the ground up, and then come back and start my own place. So that's why I went to Germany. So I signed up for an intensive language course for a couple of months, and then I went knocking on doors to get an internship, and finally found an internship in a brewery in southern Baden-Württemberg, so southern Germany, and worked there for a year, and then another brewery for 3 months, and then I went to Weinstefan, and at the end of during my studies, I worked for 2 other breweries. And then when I finished, I decided to stick around and get some experience. And I'm still there getting experience.
Wow. I mean, did you have any?
I was just going to say, you're in kind of like a small group of Americans who have made this journey in terms of like getting educated in Germany. I mean, it's a small fraternity. I think yourself, Eric Warner, I mean, there's a few others.
Right. Yeah. Before me, Dan Carey had just left. He just finished up when I started at Weinstefan. and another guy by the name of Pat Couteau. And I think he worked for Henry Weinhardt's for many years. And there's been
Dan Gordon was a Weinstefan graduate too, isn't he?
Right.
That's correct.
Yes.
He finished just before I came.
Okay, got it. And he's still brewing that German beer out here also.
He's still brewing, yeah.
You guys, you get it in your blood, and then that's that.
That's it, yeah.
Wow. Okay, and so you've spent plenty of time there. You did mention you took a German language class first.
Right, yeah.
You say that very nonchalantly, as if it's just simple to pick up German fluently, but you must be by now.
Yeah, I am not. I'm certainly, yeah. It was difficult in the beginning, but I was really eager, and of course I had no responsibilities. I had no family, not even a girlfriend, so it was easy to spend my time, getting into it and concentrating on the language, because
Sure.
that was a prerequisite for getting into Weinstefan, is that you pass the German exam. So
okay,
I've been in Germany for over a year, about 14 months, and had been working in a brewery, for 12 months. So first two months of the language course, and then 12 months of brewery work, and that's where I really learned it. Then was talking with the locals.
Sure. That makes sense. And I remember Dan Gordon in interviews with him saying, yeah, you don't go to Weinstefan and speak English. It's just not how it works. So it's part of the package.
Right.
Okay. So how long have you been with Schönram that you're at now?
I've been in Schönram for 23 years.
Wow.
So since 1998.
And the brewery itself, how long has that been there?
That's been around a while. So in the current form, in the current family constellation since 1780, we're now in the 8th generation of the family ownership. The brewery tavern, or tap, which is next door, dates back to 1512. So we assume, because of the status, there are documents that say that has given it the status of a tavern. A tavern at the time in 1512 meant that you had a lot of privileges, but also responsibilities. And one of the responsibilities was to ensure that in bad weather or in difficult times, that you could house and feed and give everybody enough drink. So usually taverns had a brewery attached to them. Okay. And we had a fire in our archives after the Second World War, so a lot of material was lost. But we found some records in Salzburg at the university that show a brewery on site in 1643 is the farthest we can go back. But we assume it goes back to 1512.
That's amazing, Matt. We just don't get any of that in the United States. Anything old like that for us is, it's a landmark. It's the Grand Canyon. That's what we get.
No, and I think a lot of us, think about these German breweries having always made Helles and always made Pilsner and always made wheat beer, but that's a relatively recent part of the history of a brewery of this age. Is that correct? I mean, these were probably brown beers before this time.
That's correct. Yeah, we were, especially because of our location being in South Bavaria, right at the foot of the Alps. The water coming off the Alps and filling the aquifers is quite hard, has a lot of carbonate hardness. And so that kind of water is best suited for brewing dark beer. And so we were what was called back then a Braunbier Brauerei, so a brown beer brewing. So Dunkles was actually the only beer we made, and it wasn't until 1955 that we started brewing Helles.
Wow. And so why the change in 55 then? Just a way you could treat the water differently, or?
Yeah, well, we do a very primitive treatment with flake lime, where we just overdose the water with calcium hydroxide, and through precipitation get the bicarbonate out. Of course, you can boil the water, but that's very costly and very time consuming to get the hardness out of it. Okay. But through these, a simple process of sedimentation. So it's by adding slaked lime, you get a higher pH, and that speeds up the reaction and the sedimentation of the calcium bicarbonate and magnesium hydroxide as well. So you get the 70% of the hardness taken out through that, and that's perfect then for making lagers or Helles, Pilsner, whatever.
Wow. And was it also a reflection of the market at the time? Just that people wanted something a bit lighter and crisper?
Yeah, that all started in Pilsen in 1842. There was a Bavarian gentleman by the name of Joseph Groll, who went there and was working at the Pilsner Brewery. And 1842, he came out with the original Pilsner beer, so a paler color. And that, of course, coincided with perfecting or improving the malting techniques. So the malt was much less frequently burned or overkilned, And at the same time in Bohemia, you had the glass culture. The clear glasses were emerging, and these clear glasses, of course, combined with a pale beer, was very appealing to the eye. So,
sure.
And that was the Pilsner. So 1842. Munich's not that far away from Pilsen. So by the end of the 19th century, the news of this new kind of beer, pale in color, had reached the cities, and in Munich it was the Spaten Brewery that first started brewing that style of beer. But of course, because of the water, it's much harder in Munich. It's similar to our water essentially than it is in Pilsen. They had to dumb it down in terms of the hops, so they had to lower the hopping rates to make it not too astringent, not too bitter. The soft Czech water, of course, allows you to throw in a lot more hops than you would expect. So that became so that was 1895 when Spaten started brewing a pale lager or Pilsner style, and they exported it to northern Germany, and it took another year before they released it on the locals.
Wow.
And so 1955, so only really 59 years later, we started brewing it in Schönram. So by that time it hit the countryside as well.
So that less hopped version you describe, is that essentially the Helles? Is that the birth
That's
of
the
Helles?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the Helles is mothered, or the origin of the Helles is the Pilsner.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. I'm glad. I like the way you're describing that. It's really putting things together for me, because when I first started to learn about German beer, I definitely had been told, that Pilsner from Pilsen was this like the original hoppy beer. It's the original
right.
IPA type of hoppy beer, right? And that Helles was this lighter version of that. And this is a good connection for me to learn that history.
Yeah, it was a logical consequence of a harder water.
Interesting.
That resulted in the Helles.
And you must still make a Dunkless now, though. You still
we do,
yeah. Okay.
We're making more and more. Actually, it's I wouldn't say it's having a comeback, but people are starting to appreciate it again. So.
Got it. And Matt, how did you connect with Eric on beer?
I make it my business to know who makes the best beer, and I go try to meet them.
Nice. Yeah.
No, I think, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but I probably met you first either through European Beer Star in one of those events, or maybe before that even through John Mallett in one of our visits to your brewery. I do remember going hiking with you and Mallett and maybe and Chris from Siebel. And, the experience absolutely blew my mind, the combination of beer fresher and better than I'd ever tasted it, and then a hike in the Alps with y'all. I mean, that was insane.
Nice.
So,
yeah, it was, I think initially it was maybe World Beer Cup in 2004 or 2008.
See, that's
somewhere. It was in San Diego, and then you came to the brewery with Mallett and Fowl and
You bring up a great point, because I think World Beer Cup, if for nothing else, has brought so many international brewers together. Because that's also where I met Hedwig Neven, of course, who I work now with from Duvel, and so many other just great minds in brewing. For sure. So, but we do get to see each other, if not annually, every other year or so at Brau and European Beer Star events, which is an awesome opportunity, because again, we get to taste each other's beers and kind of catch up a little bit. So
it's always a pleasure to see you.
So Matt, what is it in your eyes? What is so unique about Eric's beer? What draws you to his lagering techniques that you're such a fan? And Eric, we lost your video if you get a sec.
Yeah.
There you go.
There we go. Big guy hit the
I
cable
don't
again.
even know where to start, but I think we'll head down this kind of road with Eric. I mean, I think a couple of the things that I've picked up, and I don't want to start with hops, but I can certainly, just talk about raw materials in general. I think Eric has always had a really good sense, maybe focusing largely on, local raw materials, and has just been a great example of a brewmaster who is, thoughtful and thinking ahead, of course, on the raw material front. And like so many things, it's not that there's so many elements, but it's very good quality elements that go into the process. And maybe that's where we should start the conversation. I mean, I feel like you have maybe better connection with some of your barley growers, the farmers that are producing the grains that are later malted for your beers, and also the hop growers.
Right.
And you have kind of like an interesting company philosophy around that. I feel like that's simple and maybe more of us could learn from, but maybe you can go into a little bit of that. I think it'd be really interesting.
Sure. Yeah, well, we in Schönram we make about this year we'll do about 120,000 hectoliters of beer, so just a little more than 100,000 barrels. And we sell 90% of that in a radius of 60 kilometers, which is about 40 miles. So people appreciate the fact that we're a local beer and a local brand. And of course, we want to have the raw materials from as close by as possible as well. And of course, the Holledau, the first farm in the Holledau, is maybe 170 kilometers away. And in Tettnang, is 300 kilometers away. So yeah, that's our farthest farm. It's 300 kilometers. And then we have the barley coming from farms that are about 120 kilometers away. Is the closest one, up to about 350. So we have some up in Franconia, which is still part of Bavaria, or is part of Bavaria, regardless of what Bavarians and Franconians say. But the Bavarians don't want the Franconians, and the Franconians don't want the Bavarians. But
that's funny. You got to have a little rivalry. That's okay.
Yeah. So it's very important for us to know, where things are grown and who grows them. And of course, it's a bit difficult on the barley front because you don't have many farmers. There maybe you could probably count them on one hand easily in Bavaria that are just barley farmers. Barley is a crop that tends to fill holes in a farm's capacity. So yeah, they'll try on maybe 5 hectare. So a hectare is 2.47 acres. They'll try on maybe 5 hectare summer barley just to see how it grows there, and hope that the price is good at the end of the year. The barley, unfortunately, is traded on the spot market. So the prices fluctuate a lot, and it's often influenced by what's happening in Australia or in Canada, or even in Argentina, or what the Chinese are doing right now. Summer barley prices are very high, and that's being blamed on the Chinese, just pretty much like everything else right now.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's all right. So it's a bit difficult to find a farm dedicated to just barley, and so we work primarily with the maltsters and locating that, because we for our size are already, we need an area of about 400 hectare, which is almost 1,000 acres for our barley. So that's about 70 or 80 farms already there. So it's really difficult to get to know every farmer individually. With the hops, it's a bit easier. We need about 12 to 15 hectare a year, depending on the harvest. So that's around 30, around 30 acres of hops that we need a year. So I have 4 farms from where I get my hops, as opposed to the 70 or 80 that I have the barley from. Mm-hmm. And it's much easier to. So I have some farms, 3 farms where I buy directly, and the rest I buy through a co-op. It's a farmer-owned co-op, that covers a wider area of the Holledau. And there I usually end up selecting from the same farms every year, but I have the option if it's a bad year for one farm, say they get hit by hail, or as this year, there's been some flooding. If one of those farms should have bad luck, I have the option of going with another one.
Got it.
You're focused predominantly on German raw materials, both on the green and hop side. I think at some point you told me that, I don't know if you've 100% gotten away from using imported hops, but it seems like your focus has always been,
Yeah, we were one of the first breweries. I think it was 2009 or at least 2010 at the latest, where we started brewing some special beers, as we call them. Like, we brewed an IPA, stouts, an imperial stout, porter. We've even done Belgian triple, saison, things like that.
Wow.
And initially, we made for the stout and imperial stout, I was using British hops, and for the IPA, I was using American hops. And suddenly, so around 2011, 12, a lot of people started brewing these styles of beers in Germany, and that coincided with the boom in the US as well. So hop prices just got crazy, and it also became difficult to get the good quality, I would say. You have guys like Matt and Sierra Nevada, of course, getting the first cut and the best lots, and whatever made it over to Europe was not exactly what you wanted to have. But at the same time, I've been advising the German Hop Growers Association since 2007, also in marketing their hops in the US, and I've been to CBC from 2007 till 2018 with them. And I'm on the board of advisors, technical advisors for the Society for Hop Research. And so they've brought out a number of very interesting varieties the last few years, and they have the qualities that you want or need to make an American style or an American inspired pale ale or IPA. And I thought, why not? These guys I have out the back door, just 100 miles up the road. Why not just go all German? So
sure. What's an example of one of those varieties that would be a German hop fitting for an American style pale or IPA?
We were the first to use the Mandarina, Bavaria. Unfortunately, it's a ridiculous name. There was a group of hops that came out. There was Mandarina, Hallertau Blanc, and Hull Melon that came out at the same time in 2012. All daughters of Cascade. So I'd say it's kind of the white trash of hops. One mother and three different fathers. But and Mandarina is an excellent hop, but it has to be picked at exactly the right time. And the farmer that does that, and where I get my Mandarina, I know that he prefers to shut off his machines, even if it's for 3 days, and he'll have his Polish or Czech workers do some other work around the farm, but just buy his time until the hop has reached its peak. And that's the hop that's unfortunately hasn't done as well in the market, I think, as it could have if the farmers would be a little more diligent about picking it at the right time, because it's a variety. It smells like green tomatoes until September 20th, I'd say. And he's starting to think, well, this is never going to get ripe. And the next day you have tangerine and mandarin orange and very sweet citrus fruit. And if that, when picked properly at the right time, is an amazing hop.
Okay. What a finicky little hop you have there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I'm not, close enough to be there to make those calls. And I feel like, some merchants and some farmers have kind of found the sweet spot and continue to deliver. And then there's also a lot that doesn't. And, melon, you mentioned Hull Melon is another one. And I feel like actually over the years, at least for our beers, We buy a fair amount of mandarina, but we also been buying or contracting for more and more melon. And that's one hop that has been finding its way kind of into our IPA program. And
Cool.
I don't think it has a little bit wider picking window, and that's why we've been able to find quality with melon. Right. But in terms of, a little bit more explosive fruit forward aroma, it's been performing well. And I always say that, like, relative to maybe US hops like Mosaic and Citra, which are just so potent and so intense and so well known by American brewers, I feel like so many brewers have passed these beautiful hops up. Either they didn't get, hops picked in the right window, or they just haven't had the patience to, really play with them and get to know them well.
Right. Yeah, and you can also do a lot with synergy. I've found that we make a pale ale that we combine Mandarina, Calista, and Ariana. And for some reason, the synergy of those, it gets close to a U.S., style pale ale, but you get the continental character coming out, which is actually what I want. If I want to make a U.S. style pale ale or IPA, then I'll buy U.S. hops. But but these are locally grown and by farmers I know, and I think it's great to have that.
Absolutely.
One thing that they found with these newer varieties, they also mistakenly, I thought, called them flavor hops. I would call them more dual purpose hops. One thing that we're seeing is that they're extremely robust in terms of things like disease, but also droughts, heat, and climate change. And I've been working with specifically Mandarina and Ariana as varieties to use in the first hopping of our Helles, for example. Wow. And I've had Mandarina in the Helles now for 2 years. It's maybe about 15% of the makeup, but I know that it works, and it's important for years down the road, because I think we're going to get to the point where some of the traditional, varieties that have been around for centuries they're just not going to cut it with climate change, with
sure.
the increased heat. It's getting hotter every year, it's getting drier every year, or we have things like we do now in Germany with these events of flash flooding and that. So you get all the rain or all the precipitation in a couple of days, and then the next 9 weeks you get nothing again. But
you guys do turn it into California.
Yeah, and specifically Mandarina and Mandarina, Ariana, also Hallertau Blanc and melon are much more tolerant of that kind of climate, which is interesting. So the whole hop harvest window is shifting. I mean, it used to be in the Hallertau. They'd start on August 15th, was sort of like the day that, said that usually everybody has started by August 15th, and that would be the first variety. The earliest variety would be Hallertau Mittelfrüh. And in Tettnang, the Hallertau Mittelfrüh or Tettnang. And many farms were done with their harvest by August 31st or August 25th. And now August 25th is more or less the earliest picking date. And a lot of farms are starting on the 31st or even September 1st. And, the last days of harvest, I know farms that, the last years have been finishing up on September 28th, which is unheard of, would have been unheard of even 10 years ago.
It's fascinating. This is the first time that I've heard climate change addressed to hops directly, with one of our interviews. And it's an excellent point that you make. And I also just want to bring up for maybe some of our more casual listeners, not to gloss over the fact that you've just said you're using, 15% or so of the Mandarina in your Helles, which is almost sacrilege for a German brewer to not just use noble hops, right? I mean, it's really, it's a bold move on your part, but
I don't make it public in Germany, but
I won't tell him. I promise. Nobody listens to this show. Don't worry. And but
I tell the hop brewers know it, and at the Hop Research Society, they know it as well. And brokers there, sorry I interrupted, are recommending that as well. So they're recommending that people try it. The problem is nobody's trying it, but somebody's got to try it. And
yeah. And that's what I mean. It's this bold move on your part, but with the explanation you gave about climate change and the durability of these strains, you're clearly saying it's necessary. If you don't figure something out, we're not going to have this Helles style as we know it anyway.
Right. Yeah. And it's, I want to know these things well enough in advance to know that it works, because I don't want to be caught with my pants down, so to speak, and have a year where I don't get my crop that's been contracted, and I have to resort to a variety that I don't know. And so, you know, I've tested, well, I wouldn't say every, but nearly every variety in the Helles, you know, just to make sure that I know how to use it should it become a necessity.
So Matt, don't you want to know how do you use it? Like, I want to know what you had to change for it to still taste like your Helles, but by using a significant percentage of a new hop. What else had to give?
Well, so our Helles is traditionally a blend of 4 different varieties, and I can tell you what they are. They're Tradition, Tradition in German. That's our standard bittering hop that we use. That's a variety that was released, so it was also created by it was bred by the Gesellschaft für Hopfenforschung, so the Hop Research Society. That came out in 1993, actually as a sort of a next generation or replacement for Hallertau Mittelfrüh. So the genes of it are primarily, you know, old landrace varieties, but also quite a bit of Satz genes in it. So it's using old varieties, Satz, Speiter, and Hallertau, bred with German, you know, male hops, to try to create a hop that's a little more robust and a little more reliable in terms of alpha acids and yield. So this was released in 1993, and that's my bittering hop, which is actually it was bred as an aroma hop. So it's that, then Speiter Select, which was also released in 1993. That contains a lot of also Satz genes. It's unique in that it has also farnesene. My English terms sometimes, is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, farnesene, yes.
Farnesene, yeah, okay. So which is typical of the Satz family. And then Hersbrucke, which is an old landrace. You know, Hersbrucke is a region, used to be a hop growing region. I mean, there's still hops grown there, but administratively and statistically, it's now counted as part of the Hallertau. But it's to the west, or to the east of Nuremberg, east and southeast of Nuremberg. So Hersbrucke and Safia, which is a variety that came out in 2002. And similar.
You said that last one was Saphir?
Yeah. So those are the 4 hops that I use. And so by in doing so, then I'm able from year to year to adjust the percentage of each of those hops to accommodate for fluctuations in the harvest. And on top of that, then we're using as many as 3 harvests of each variety. So I could have as many as 12 lots of hop in one Helles. And by blending the different harvests, the different years, I'm compensating for the fluctuations as well. So, but I can reduce the amount of one variety and increase the amount of another from year to year, depending on how the harvest is gone. And so the hop I've sacrificed in this case to accommodate for Mandarina has been Tradition, Tradition. So it's the early, so it's a bittering. I'm using it as a bittering hop.
Okay.
And I mean, I think a lot of our listeners think of hops as just this year to year. I'm just always trying to burn through my latest crop year and get into the new crop year. I'm not really thinking about blending, certainly not 3 crop years together to try to get to this homogeneous end. And I think there's good reason for that from your perspective, in that, and you can go into more detail, but a few things that come to mind for me are, one, you're dealing with much smaller farms.
Right. Yeah.
you're dealing with a smaller percentage of those farms, or at least the hectares under irrigation. So maybe year to year, crop to crop variation is a little more extreme coming from Germany. I think one thing that you've tipped me off on and that I'm paying more and more attention to is when there is a good year for a particular variety, you should go a bit longer, because it could be that next year it's not going to be so good, or maybe even a couple years, and that that you should pay attention and kind of take advantage of those premium years, and maybe you can kind of take it from there. I mean, I can see that why this blending of multiple years is so advantageous for you.
Yeah, it's the Helles is not a hop forward beer, but it's very delicate. So it's about 20 bittering units, fluctuates between 18 and 20 without doing anything different. Just if you analyze it, it's that's just the the fluctuations we have in the analysis. But it's not hop forward, but the hops that are in there are very good hops, and even the slightest change is perceivable, also just because of the base beer itself. It's just Pilsner malt, very highly attenuated, and through the high attenuation, that allows the hops to really come out and shine, even at a low level. So people perceive the bitterness, or they can taste it and smell it. And the funny thing is people want or expect, they know that beer is a natural product. It's an agricultural product, twofold as opposed to wine, onefold. Wine just has the grapes. We have the hops and the barley. Class traditionally, or usually, if it's a good barley year, it's a shitty hop year, and if it's a great hop year, it's a shitty barley year. Unfortunately, but that's the way it works. So people want a natural product, but at the same time, they expect consistency, reliable consistency, and that's the only way to achieve that is through blending different harvests, in my opinion. It works. I mean, obviously, if you don't have the capacity to keep it cold, we store our hops at 2 degrees Celsius. Half of my hops have been pelletized by the end of October, so it goes straight from the farm. I select early. They go to the farm, in the month or from the farm to the pelletizing plant in September. They're pelletized by the end of October, most of them, and the rest by the end of November. So that's all very quick, and it's all cold. So I try to keep the chain of refrigeration constant, from the harvest on, and then maintain that, throughout. So you can store a harvest for 4 years. Wow. And we're pretty unusual in that we have hops on hand for just under 2 years. So I contract for a full year. A full year plus, say I contract for about 110% of what I need, and in a good year, like you're saying, Matt, I'll buy more, and so, and usually, I mean, it ends up that I'm getting it from this farm, say Tradition, for example. I'm getting 8 tons, and it's all coming from this farm. Well, the whole lot is 10 tons, so why don't I just take that if it's great? And that's what I do. At the same time, because I've been working with this co-op, or I even do it with these individual farms, is I'll say in a bad year, it's like, okay, I've got a little bit of a buffer built up here at home, so I don't really need everything I've contracted. And I say to the farm or to the co-op, I say, look, I'll just take 5 tons instead of 8. And you can take those 3 tons and sell them on the spot market for yourself and help yourself out a little bit. And then will reciprocate in a bad year and help me out. So it's our part of our philosophy at Schönram is to live and let live. So we really, we try to help our growers out where we can, and they reciprocate by helping us out when we need it.
I love this.
Such a great philosophy. And I feel like it's a different landscape because there's so many small farmers there compared to this kind of smaller number of large farms in the United States.
Yeah.
And for us to go and do selection, we're kind of dealing with a different lot size. We're dealing with kind of a whole different beast when it comes to the selection and obtaining good quality. And again, to the original point, I think the more that, craft brewers here on this side of the pond can kind of get their head around that concept, and maybe get over and see what's going on over there would be the best way.
Oh yeah, I highly recommend crossing the pond and then having a look. They're letting Americans in now. It's I think Europeans aren't allowed to travel to the U.S. just yet, unfortunately. Right. But it's I mean, obviously, if you have a smaller brewery, I mean the pellet, the run of a pellets, say at in St. Johann is a big pelletizing plant. You need 1,500 kilos for a run, or they might do 1,000, but of course you got losses on both ends. So the bigger volume you have, the greater the less the losses are going to be, and the better it is, and the cheaper it is in the end. Then, so if you have 30% loss, of course, at the end of the day, the hops are going to be pretty expensive. But for small brewers, it might be an idea to get together and find a sort of a common denominator in terms of what you want, and buy that together. And well, Matt, we've done this together. We buy Calista together.
And that brings up an excellent point. So yeah, we got together on a relatively small amount, but it was enough to satisfy our two breweries. I certainly felt honored because I got to take advantage of some of your selection expertise and just boots on the ground. And maybe the element of that would be interesting to the listeners is that you convinced me to do a little bit of concentrating of that material, and maybe you could go into that detail a little bit.
Right.
Is there?
Yeah, it all depends on what kind of technology you have. We have a Whirlpool from 1981, which at the time it was conceived. They had gone from hop strainers to Whirlpools, and the engineering hadn't really been thought out yet. It was just the idea was to just take a tank and put a pipe in going in sideways tangentially to get a Whirlpool effect going, and use that then to sediment out your hops. And it's only been, I guess about 25 years ago they figured out how these things really work. So a modern Whirlpool is really nothing, or should be nothing more than a cool ship with a lid on it. A circular cool ship with a lid on it. They're much broader and much squatter than the old ones, but they're more effective. Of course, for the kind of beers that most Germans are making, you don't need that diameter. But at any rate, to reduce the load on your Whirlpool, you can have the hops concentrated or standardized. So let's say you have a Hersbrucke with 3%, which that would actually be pretty good, because the 10-year average is about 2.7. Or let's say you have a bad year. Let's say you have 2%. Well, if you standardize that to 3%, that means you take out enough of the green of the vegetal matter to get it from 2% to 3% alpha. That's actually a pellets 66. So it's people talk about 45, type 45 and type 90. So type 90 essentially just being the raw hop cones, where you got to help me here, Matt, the English term for the
you're using the whole cone and you're milling all the material with maybe just the strig being removed. So essentially exactly, 90% of the material. Yeah.
Couldn't think of the strig in English, but this. So that's been removed. So you have about 90% of the original material is in the pellet. And pellets 45 are what often are, that's when people talk about concentrating or standardizing the pellets. Well, most pellets type 45 are just to bump the alphas up a little bit. So we have, for a lot of our varieties, we'll take, for example, tradition from 6.5% up to 8%, or Hallertau Mittelfrüh from 4.5% to 6%. So we're always working in the range. I mean, we will have a pellets 50, but we're usually in the range somewhere between 50 and 80. So it's just to lower a little bit of the load on the, on the technological side. And well, essentially for every kilogram of hot pellets you use, 1 kilogram sucks up 13 liters of wort.
Yeah.
So every kilogram you can save is wort one. And if we had a string of bad years, and for the Helles, I had to bump the pelletized hops up for one brew from 9 kilos to 15 kilos over a series of 3 years. And so with every brew, I was losing 70 liters of wort. And if you have 800 brews of Helles a year,
yeah,
a hell of a lot of beer.
Well, and it's interesting on this side, cryo hops, or these T45s that have a little bit of special processing, but for all intents and purposes, it's a very similar process, is kind of a new age thing for a lot of craft brewers here. And yet this concentrating of pellets has been going on for better part of a couple decades in Germany. And it always made me think that maybe there was some possibility to intensify some of these, what we're calling flavor hops, the Mandarina, Bavaria, the Hummel, and some of these Kalista, even to something that might even be more interesting to the U.S. brewer looking to use them to dry hop. Yeah, better yields. Obviously, that was kind of the intent of the whole thing, and some consistency, but also maybe some more intense flavors down the line.
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
It might be an economically viable way of utilizing them. I just wanted to mention, you mentioned Kalista, and this is a hop that, again, when we were there rubbing, I just fell in love with that hop. There were all these soft fruit and tropical notes, and it's just this gorgeous hop. And maybe not the same intensity as a Mosaic or something, but we found a place for it because it's such a low alpha hop with this relatively high linalool and a nice intensity.
Right, yeah, exactly.
That we're using at hot side on our hazy IPAs, where you don't want bitterness, but you want this fruitiness. And linalool is known to be, one of these biotransformative components.
Right, yeah.
And it just seems like the perfect hop to use in a hazy IPA, where you have all the elements, low alpha, high oil, and linalool. And so I've been kind of extending my contracts a little bit on that. So you and I will have to talk.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, there's also, it's limonene. Limonene is in there. But that's also one that, goes, fits into the biotransformation to the yeast.
Yeah.
Well,
we spent all this great time on hops, and I think we go to the finish line talking about hops, but I promised Justin that we would dig a little deeper into kind of your lager brewing philosophy. And I would just love to kind of go through a little bit of that. And I should know where to start, but I think, we could kind of start in the brew house and maybe work our way a little bit through the process.
Sure.
I don't know how much time we have for detail, but I think there's a few elements in your process that are unique and certainly meaningful.
Sure, yeah. We could start. I could start with the barley. I like the older varieties. The problem is, the barley is driven by something beyond our control, and so there's new varieties coming out every year. On the average of 3 to 4 varieties are being approved for growers. So, and growers, of course, are going for the highest yield, which is really not what we want. So the variety, I'm always about 5 to 6 years behind the development. So I'm always using the oldest varieties that I can get. Some of the older varieties, for example, like Steffi, are all in the hands of Augustina. You can't find anybody to grow them for you because they're all growing it for Augustina. But I like varieties that are easier to control in the germination, that they don't run away in the germination process and get over modified. I also like low color. So we're using a variety called Parque and Marte, and Steffi I've kind of unfortunately gotten away from that because it's hard to get. It's just too hard to find, and it's to reliably get it from year to year. That is a bit of a problem. But then we take it into the brew house then and decoct everything. We do single decoction. And that's why I say to the maltsters, leave the mashing to me, because of course the higher the modification, the less you have to mash. And I don't want it to convert and just if you just get it wet and then you have a conversion already. I don't want that. So I take about 2 hours 20, 2.5 hours to mash. And it's a step infusion leading up to about anywhere between 63 and 68 C. And at that temperature, somewhere in there, I'll draw off 2/3 of the mash into the lauter tun, because I don't have a mash cooker. And then I'll use my mash tun as a mash cooker then, and heat then that 1/3 that remains behind, heat that up to 72 to get some alpha amylase activity, and actually get a conversion there already. And then I'll heat it up to a boil, and depending on the beer style, we'll boil a little longer, a little bit shorter. The dark beer, of course, I boil the longest, but the Helles, for example, is basically I just heat it up to boil, and then I mash out into the lauter tun to bring that whole mix in there up to 72. I'll let that sit for 15 minutes for conversion, and then bring the rest up to hit about 76, 77. I'm sorry, I'm using Celsius rather than Fahrenheit, but
it's okay. Everyone's got Google. They can Google.
I can't for the life of me. And I mean, even going to engineering school, we in Golden, we talked in Celsius and kilograms and grams and all that. So
Does that mean you have steam on the lauter tun, or something comes back to the mash mixer for that final step?
No, we can't. Once we're in the lauter tun, we can't go back. So the lauter tun is just well insulated. I even have the floor of it insulated, and the ring underneath is insulated, so everything that gets in there retains its heat. And we got we're mashing in every 3.5 hours, so that thing never really cools down that much. So so I'm using in fact, when we just had 2 vessels in the brew house, just the mash tun mash cooker was also the copper, so the brew kettle, and then the lauter tun. But now I have 3 vessels in there aside from the whirlpool. And so I mash in then, do my step infusion, draw off to the lauter tun, heat up, decoct, transfer to the lauter tun to get 72, let it sit for 15 minutes, and transfer the rest up to hit 76, 77, then start lautering. And once I get to the second sparge, then I'll mash in the next brew, because that infusion is long enough that by the time I'm ready to transfer those 2/3 to the lauter tun, I've already lautered off and I've gotten the spent grains out. So that's about a 7.5 hours or 7.5 brews per day that we get through there, and that's in that method. So
then the $1 million question is your opinion on decoction in terms of flavor development. I'm sure there's some additional efficiencies gained there. Maybe those are quantifiable, but I think most importantly is the flavor and the quality that you derive through that decoction.
Right. Yeah. Some folks say they do decoction to get more malt flavor into the beer, more body and that. And I actually use the decoction to tighten the beer up to get it more crisp and more dry. Mm-hmm. So we hit an attenuation, apparent final attenuation of about 87% with the decoction. That if in the same time I were to do an infusion, I'd hit about 84%. And of course, if you heat that mass up to boil, the size of our brew house is 90 hectoliters, knockout wort, 93 hectoliters, hot wort. So for the decoction, I need 10 liters more of oil. We heat our steam generator with oil, or fire with oil. So I need 10 more liters of oil to achieve 3% more in attenuation. If I were to try to hit that attenuation with infusion, I could do it, but I'd need 15 more minutes in the mash. So, doing 36 brews a week, 15 minutes is a hell of a lot. I lose almost 2 brews then. So, but what the decoction does is, I think, it dries the beer up and allows those hops to really shine. And at the same time, we have a sweetness that people perceive. So many people say our Helles has a sweet finish. Well, it kind of does, but it's actually the alcohol. So alcohol imparts a sweet flavor to the beer. So it's pretty schizophrenic, really. You've got the sweetness coming from alcohol, but it's only 5.4 on the label. It's 5%, but in the beer it's actually 5.4%. We're allowed to be 0.5% off on what we put on the label, but so that alcohol adds a body to the beer, fullness, a sweetness, but at the same time you get this really crisp, fantastic hop finish. And that works with the Helles, which is 11.8 Plato, but it also works with like the Bockbier. We make a pale Bockbier. It's 17.8 Plato, but we also get up to, I hit about 85-86% attenuation with that.
Wow.
And then you can just throw massive amounts of hops at a beer like that, because that alcohol then offsets the bitterness of the hops. So people think that it's kind of sweet, but it's really not. It's bitter.
Yeah.
It's got 40 bittering units and actually tastes kind of sweet.
I love that taste in a Helles, by the way. I consider a traditional well done Helles when I can taste that little bit of sweetness that I can never quite put my finger on what it is. I don't really even describe it as sweetness sometimes, but it's what it is to me. That's the perceived flavor that I get. And to me, it's very specific to a well-made German Helles. So I really like that. And then Just so I'm clear, because over the years, the whole decoction, not decoction debate that occurs in online forums and podcasts is that with highly modified modern malts, you just don't need it. But if I heard you right, you said you'd actually, you try to get malts that aren't as highly modified because you want to do it yourself. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah. I always say leave the mashing to me.
Yeah. And I thought that's what you said. And so that really, even the argument against decoction sort of goes away when you mention, hey, actually, if I can get my malts less modified, I do,
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah, no, it's, so, well, we still manage to mash in every 3.5 hours by doing the single decoction. And the way we're set up, I can't do a double decoction or a triple decoction. So we don't need it, but I'd love to try it. So
I had a beer the other day from Wayfinder that was triple decoction. And when before I tasted it, I was just reading the description, and I just thought, well, that's just excessive. Do you just like to work more or what? Triple decoction just sounds like a lot of work, or at least a lot of time, right?
It is. Yeah, it's a lot of time. Yeah. But I think 2 hours, 15, 2 hours, 2 hours and a half for a single decoction, that's fine. That's acceptable.
Okay. Got it.
So talk to me about the hopping in the kettle then. Now we've gotten the wort into the kettle.
Right.
And I suspect that this Helles is not dry hops, so all the hops are the hot side.
Yeah, it's so the Helles is hopped 3 times. We hop about 10 minutes into the boil, and we boil for 65 minutes. Evaporate about 5.5%. We hop about 10 minutes into the boil, first hopping, with its tradition and Mandarina. I've also used Ariana, for example. And then the next hoppings are 30 minutes before the end of boil, so 30 minutes into it, and 10 minutes before the end of boil. And we also use hang on a second. It's a lactic culture that we've recovered from the malt. So it's lactic acid we use to correct the pH. So we do that in the mash, but also in the boil. So after the third hopping, then we add in the lactic acid to bring the pH down, So at knockout, we're about 5.1.
Mm-hmm.
And that lactic acid was originally recovered from our malts about 30 years ago. And that's a culture we continue propagating. It's like sourdough, basically. You can see it like that. So yeah, I mean, you could use acidulated malt, which I would if I didn't have this. In Germany, of course, we can use acidulated malt, but we can also use this lactic culture, but it has to have been lactic acid that's been recovered from the raw material itself. And that, I think, really benefits us later on in the process, because you get some acids coming in that you don't get out of the raw materials and that you don't get out of fermentation, that help later on in the maturation process and through esterification to give you sort of another dimension to the flavor that's a bit different from what you would normally get if you didn't use it.
Okay. And is the yeast then? You probably can go into wort cooling at that point, but yeah, I'm sorry. You can take it from there.
Yeah. Well, for example, like our dark beer we just give 2 hoppings to it. The Pilsner we give 5 in the brew house, so we use first wort hops on there, and then whirlpool hops, and then the rest of the stuff's in the middle. So, and every hopping that we do is a blend of not of harvest years, and then like for the Helles we blend the Select, the Hersbrucker, and the Safia in the second and the third hoppings.
Evenly, just an even amount of each of those hops in the.
Yeah, well, I vary depending on my notes from the harvest and.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's I'm increasing the amount of one and decreasing the amount of another depending from year to year. I mean, a lot of it's my perception and psychological, but of course I feel much more confident about the beer if I'm doing it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, and then so we knock it out into our whirlpool and we cool down then from there to 6 degrees Celsius, and we have a pre-rise and fermentation. It's all open fermentation. Pre-rise and fermentation to 9.5 C, so that's the equivalent of 49 Fahrenheit. So my pain threshold for fermentation temperature is 10 C, which is about 50 Fahrenheit. So it has to be below 50 to be clean for me. And that takes about, so we let that in ferment more or less. That's the biggest problem is yeast nutrition these days with the barley varieties you're getting, or with just the barley you're getting, because the yields are going up and up and up, and it's not going up through fertilization, fertilizer, things like that. You're not allowed to use much to enhance growth. I mean, you can add nitrogen to the soil and that as a farmer, but you can't really do anything else to enhance yield or growth. So it's all variety driven. And of course, the bigger the yields, or the greater the yields per surface area, the more the trace elements, which are finite in the soil, are spread out over a greater volume or greater mass of barley. So it's all, you can also do quite a bit in the mash and in the pH of the mash to get more. For example, zinc is a very important trace element for yeast health, and this is sometimes, I think, damn unfortunate in Germany. We can't add yeast nutrients. We got to figure out other ways to do it. It would be nice to just toss some zinc into the kettle and it'd be good. So depending on the harvest, it's another harvest thing. It could take 10 to 12 days to reach end fermentation, final gravity. So we end ferment everything.
So you really are there. There is nothing you can do for yeast nutrients then. Is there anything in the Reinheitsgebot that you can add that would help with this? Well,
you can do special brews, and I know there are brewers that do that. That they run the barley through or the malt through a hammer mill, and then do an acidic brew using a lot of lactic culture to get at a very low pH. Will lower the pH the higher the extraction of zinc is out of the husk. So and using that then to dose back in the brew house to add zinc to the wort. So it's very, but you need the capacity and the time to do that.
Sure. So you're saying then just because the yeast might be slightly less healthy than say you would want it, slightly less robust, it's just a matter of time. You're just waiting longer for it to finish its job.
I mean, it takes longer for it. So I mean, we compensate by adding more yeast in years with lower zinc levels.
I see.
We increase the time in the brew house, in the mash, and that to extract a little bit more zinc, but I don't have the luxury of making a zinc brew or whatever. I just don't have the time and the space for that.
Got it.
Is this yeast variety, yeast strain specific to a brewery, or are you kind of a Weihenstephan 3470 fan, or?
Yeah, I think the original, our strain was originally a 3470, but it's our house strain, and we have it at the yeast bank as such. I think it's the perfect lager yeast. It has a nice, it performs well at low temperatures. It takes a while, but it gets to final attenuation. Of course, if it has more yeast or more zinc in the wort, it'll go faster. It doesn't produce much diacetyl, and for me, it's fantastic, and it has that sulfur, sulfur dioxide, like the freshly struck match that you want and expect in Alice, and that goes through until the bottle, and it really, it's perceptible 6 to 8 weeks in. That eventually diminishes, but if you get that little sulfur, that freshly struck match when you pour the beer, it's really fresh. So we end ferment and then cool it down to about 3.5 C, and then rack it off, and then we krausen everything. So we add 7% krausen, and all of our beers are brewed in the brew house to accommodate for krausen coming from the Helles, because that's the main brand with 80%.
So back maybe to the primary fermentation, because you mentioned open fermentation. I know you have some theories on kind of the geometry and the advantage of these open fermenters.
That's correct, yeah. We don't want to stress the yeast. So we've kind of said 4 meters of height, that's a 0.4 bar of hydrostatic pressure at the bottom of the vessel. 4 meters of height, but that's 5 meters in diameter. So our vessels all tend to be wide and flat, and so not so high. So the yeast is never put under too much duress while it's fermenting, because if you imagine, this living organism driven to the surface by the convection, of the fermentation, the CO2 being produced, and so you get the scum coming to the surface, and we skim that off, and that stuff is left in the beer, gets over time through the convection taken back into the beer, and through rising alcohol content will be taken into solution and impart an astringency or an unpleasant bitterness or finish in the beer. So skimming the heads, we just take the crap out of it, basically.
It's one of those points of attention to detail that not every brewer in a cylinder conical or uni tank has that advantage of being able to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're lucky in that I'm lucky in that my boss, the owner of the brewery, sees it the way I do, and that the family tradition has been that way as well. They want to, one of our mottos is tradition and progress in unity. So we have modern equipment, but we try to maintain traditional methods and traditional practices.
And of course, for all that to work, you have to have a very clean brewery, spotless brewery.
Yeah. Well, that's hard. That's hard. I mean, we do our best, but can never be clean enough.
I'm not sure I've seen a cleaner brewery before, but you're doing a pretty good job.
Also, just spoken like a German brewer too. It can never be clean enough. It's very clean, but it can never ever.
No. Cleanliness is it's really primary importance.
Yes.
So this moves us then to another area of some debate here, at least stateside, is horizontal, shallow maturation vessels and this krausening that you do.
Right. Well, the krausening, well, first of all, so at the end of primary, we cool down we take 48 hours to cool it down. So we want to get as much of the yeast out as we can. So we pitch it about 18 million per milliliter. And, that multiplies up, that goes up to about 80 million, say. And we don't want to go into lagering or maturation with much more than 20 million if we can. We'd like to get below that, coming out of fermenter. And then we add 7% krausen beer. So that's, so it's in the stage of high krausen. So when you get the kind of almost the froth on the top, this really tight, what we call Schneckenkrausen, so snail krausen, looks like a little snail houses on top of the beer. That's when the yeast is most active and most vibrant, say, and most lively. And by blending 7% of that in, you bring fermentable sugars, viable yeast, a healthy yeast, and you have a good secondary fermentation starting at about 3.5, 4 C. And we just let that go then for 2 weeks and maintain that temperature. And after 2 weeks, then we'll start gradually dropping the temperature. We have a non-negotiable maturation time of 28 days. And I try to keep it at 33, and that's been okay. That's been fine the last few years. And if it looks like we're gonna maybe come below the 28 days, we start rationing the beer. So we cut off customers away the first. So then we just don't send any beer to Berlin, for example. And then they just don't get any because we want to keep the home front satisfied, and those are the people that are they keep us alive. So
yeah,
we want to make sure they're happy. So they we make sure that. But we'll go down to. I don't know. I hope you can hear me. But,
yeah, we can hear you. It's cutting out just a little bit, but we still got you.
Okay. Don't know what's happening here. Sorry. Here we go.
That's okay.
Yeah. So so for sales and marketing, for them, it's a 28-day non-negotiable in my head, and all my colleagues and brewers are on board with this. It's 33 days. And we could theoretically sell the beer at 23 days or 24 days, but it does so much in those last 4 or 5 days there. So once you hit 24, 25 days, there's a huge improvement and a huge maturation and flavor in that. So we always strive for that. When we always tell sales and marketing what we have for 28 days, but that's actually 33 days.
And how would you put words to that change in maturation in that 24 and beyond days? Like what what are you tasting as the brewmaster that's changing or mellowing?
Yeah, there's certainly the edge is gone. It's really hard to describe, and I think in this thing we did at the Brewers of Europe, Yvonne touched on that. There's some evidence that there's some things going on, some secretions of peptides and polypeptides in maturation that add to the body and to the mellowness of the beer. And that's something that they're actually looking for money right now for doing some research into that to see what the yeast is actually doing. So it's yeast excretions back into the beer. Obviously, you have problems if the yeast excretes too much. If it's autolyzing, you get problems with flavor and with head retention. But if it excretes a bit, it adds to body and to flavor and to the mellowness and the overall complexity of the beer. And so that's something I would say that's where the edge is coming off the beer. It's just that little bit that it's really hard to put your finger on, and it's something that if you're thirsty and the beer is cold and you're thirsty and it's your first beer, you could knock that back. If it's been in the tank for 10 days and it's otherwise well made, you wouldn't notice. And by halfway through the second beer, then you start to notice something's wrong. It's something different, or it's just not quite on, And if you, after the second glass, you have to fight your way through the third one, then you know that there's been some compromising going on either in the fermentation temperature or in the lagering time, and that's one of the ingredients. In fact, we're going to put it on the label here the next time labels are going to be printed. Is water, barley malt, hops, yeast, and time. So time is going to be
because every self-respecting German beer drinker needs to get through the third pint. Let's be honest. So.
That's, we count on our people. Otherwise we wouldn't be selling 100,000 barrels in a 40-mile radius. It's
right.
The locals expect to be able to drink 5 or 6 half liters of beer and not be impaired or too impaired. Obviously not to drive or whatever. I don't want to promote that, but and they want to wake up the next morning and feel fine. But it should be really, the sign of a high drinkability then is in that case is that you have to make a subconscious or a conscious decision. Your subconscious is going to keep wanting more, but your conscious has to say, hey, hold on, cowboy. You got to get up for work tomorrow. You got you can't be drinking all night.
That's right.
So it does beg the question though, can you lager too long? Is there a point where you're wanting to move that beer forward? And do you have a feeling for that? I suppose it cheese and a number of other things.
Yeah, we had through the pandemic here, we had some problems obviously, and how much beer should we make? How much should we be brewing? Because pubs were closed and people were working from home and weren't going out so much. So there was a period of uncertainty. So last year, so 2020, we reduced too much and then had problems keeping up. And this year we were projecting similar because we had a lockdown in Germany from November through May. So we brewed too much, anticipating similar behavior to 2020. The difference being is that 2020 the weather was much nicer, so people were out in March and April outdoors, and as soon as Germans can go outdoors, they just drink more beer, even if it's not in a beer garden or a pub or whatever. They're drinking more in their garden. So we built up too much stock in the lagering cellars, and we had some Helles in the cellar that was between 60 and 70 days old in maturation, so not including primary fermentation. And I mean, it's I would say our beer reaches its peak. The Helles reaches its peak at around. I mean, up to 40 days, it's fine. And once you get beyond 40 days, it starts to lose its luster a bit. It gets a bit tired and a bit dull, and it's not as bright and as lively. So we were very careful. We were blending 70-day-old beer with 21-day-old beer to hit 30 days, 35 days or whatever, to make sure that that beer stayed nice and bright. So for the Helles, it depends on the gravity. So like if anything below 12 up to 6 weeks is, so 42 days is perfect. The Pilsner, on the other hand, if it gets another week, 49 days, perfect, even 8 weeks. And then the higher gravity beers, we have a beer called the Gold, which is sort of like a Mjødsen. It's 8 weeks is just fine. That's actually 8 weeks is optimum. That's 63 days. And then well, we have a book beer, for example, a Christmas beer. Those in I think 70 days is just right. And actually, to get back to the whole lagering thing, you asked about geometry, and I got off on a tangent. But the geometry of the lagering maturation vessels is also very important. So I think our best beer comes out of horizontals, and they have 4 meters in diameter. That has been limited by the fact that that's how high the bridges are in the Autobahn. So when they're coming from the manufacturer on the trailer, on the tank, and then a little bit of clearance, you have about 5 meters. So I can get a 4-meter tank onto a truck and still get under the bridge without it, scratching the bridge. But still, say 4 meters and 13 meters or whatever in length is just right. So we try to stay under 4 meters, and if they're vertical vessels, we try to hit a height to diameter ratio of 1 to 1. So we're never higher than 4 meters, which I think is also important. It's also makes it easier in the carbonation. The secondary fermentation is a natural carbonation process, so you don't have a layering of different CO2 levels throughout the tank. There, the natural convection turns it over enough. If it's wide enough, you get enough natural convection that it's all the same CO2 content throughout the vessel. So I didn't want to forget to talk about that.
No, it's perfect. I love that the geometry is dictated by by the freeway, by the highway. It's the ideal geometry because it fits. It makes it to the brewery.
It goes under the bridge.
Matt, I remember when you were building your brewery years ago, you had said that to me too, that you had these tanks coming that you guys were like, I don't know, man, they might need a crane to lift them over the overpasses or something.
They can deliver bigger vessels than that, or wider vessels, but then all of a sudden your freight costs explode. Even if the manufacturer is only 300 kilometers down the road, it could be that instead of 5,000 euros for freight to get the tank
right
from there to your place, it might be 20,000 or 30,000.
Sure.
Because they have to avoid bridges. It's crazy.
Yeah. So many things that are prohibitive.
You're a brewer and you have to think about.
Well, Matt, you were right that we were gonna get to a point where we just have to do another show with Eric, because we could definitely talk more lager brewing. And I just really appreciate
this has been really wonderful. And we did cover the majority of what I planned on covering, and I could sit here and just listen for a couple more hours. I think there's a bunch of detail that we could dig into later. So maybe we have to have you on the show at a later date, but it's just amazing. And, for the listeners out there, I encourage you to seek these beers out, especially if you're interested in lager brewing. I think it's just so critical to taste kind of those foundational, well-made beers. And as you heard, I mean, Eric has a philosophy and a program that's well tested, starting from raw materials all the way through. So yeah, it was just a pleasure to listen to all of this. And thank you so much for joining us. It was amazing.
Oh, it was a pleasure being here, talking to you. It was great seeing you also, just virtually, but
yes,
soon in Belgium or in Germany. So.
Correct.
Yes. It's Schönram Brewing Company. Schönram Brauerei, I guess, is closer. If you want to go seek out this beer the next time, you can enter Bavaria, like I can't wait to do again. And I will absolutely be coming to seek out your beer, Eric. And yeah, I did have 2 questions I wanted to sneak in.
Sure.
Quick answers. I'm sorry, Matt. I just had to. They just kind of came to me as we were talking, and one of them was the can craze in the US. Will German brewers, and maybe more specifically German beer drinkers, consumers, do you think that'll ever jump onto from the traditional bottle that we are so used to with German beers to this can craze that's happening?
Well, I think the brewers would love to.
Okay.
And probably the consumers as well. The can used to be a bigger thing in Germany, but every can has 25-cent deposit on it. So
okay,
that's a bit prohibitive. And people have to take the cans back. So every retail outlet that sells cans has to take cans back, even if they don't sell those cans, and pay 25-cent deposit. So you can't also destroy the can before you have to bring the can back as a whole unit. You can't crush it. It's not recyclable in terms of, how many pounds or kilos or whatever. So that's a bit of a problem that we kind of created ourselves, because the small independent brewers were against the can because it was littering the countryside, and bottles are returnable. And, it's bottles, of course, for if you're a regional brewer like we are, makes sense because the carbon footprint is much lower. And this is even before the time when people were talking about carbon footprint. But in Austria, a lot of breweries can, and so I'm hiking in the region just south of us, on the border between Bavaria and Austria, and you see guys from our village at the top of the mountain drinking Austrian beer out of the can. I think, God damn it, And I schlepped the bottles to the top of the mountain,
right.
But we'd love to, and it used to be also that the can was steel, so the body was steel and the lid was aluminum, and now I think it's all aluminum, so it might be a lot easier to recycle as well. So I'm all for the can. It's also because you don't get the light, and I think that's even bigger than heat or temperature. I think the light factor is what really kills the beer.
Okay, I'm glad I asked, because I honestly was in my head, the answer had everything to do with tradition, and it's not. It's all of these other factors that are so important.
Right. Yeah.
So, okay, and then the other one I just got to sneak into, and I'm mostly doing this, Matt, because both you and I on different occasions have talked about hazy beer by saying, "Oh yeah, you mean like German beer, like Keller beer, like a Hefeweizen?" Like, in other words, hazy beer, which I'm drinking now, is the new, is talked about the new thing here in the US. It's not a new thing.
Got one right here.
and you've got one right there. So my question for you is not the normal question, like, do you like it? What do you think? What I actually want to know from you is what a German perception is of our hazy beer. Do you also joke like we might and say, oh yeah, they just figured out how to make Hefeweizen with hops? Like, is it, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. I think it's funny because if I think back to the early 80s, when I first got interested in beer, and the new breweries are popping up everywhere. That was one of the things that people were critical of these brew pubs or microbreweries. I mean, nobody talked about craft breweries back then, but microbreweries or whatever, is that they were so hazy and it looks a bit dirty and it looks a bit like homebrew and that. and it took, almost 3 decades to clean the beer up and get them bright. Now everybody's making them dirty again. I think it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and that was actually one of the big problems. You mentioned Eric Warner, who went to Weinstefan, Matt. We were in the same class, and he came back to the U.S. and his passion was Weissbier, and he brought Weissbier onto the market in Denver, and then 1992, and people were like, what the fuck, this is hazy.
Yeah.
He was just ahead of the time. So
he was ahead.
Yeah. And the Germans, the funny thing is now is, haze is, a lot of the wheat beers are no longer bottle conditioned, they're tank conditioned, and they run them through a centrifuge and flash pasteurize them. The flash pasteurization cracks the protein and creates a permanent haze. And a classically, traditionally made Weissbier at room temperature in the liquor store is going to be bright, and it has a sediment on the bottom, and you got to cool it. And you might get a little bit of a chill haze when you cool it down in the fridge, but you got to agitate the sediment and dump it in the beer to make the haze. So right. we got 2 factions in Germany right now. We live close to the border, and the Austrians are making a lot of Zwickelbier, so Keller beer, but it's all flash pasteurized, non-bottle conditioned. It's not even,
it's just chill haze.
Yeah, well, no, it's denatured protein. It's a nightmare. Okay. So we put Zwickelbier, so unfiltered beer into the keg, and properly Zwickelbier is like, so we have our fest beer, which is 8 months or 8 weeks in the lagering tank before we put it in the keg, and it's basically a bright beer. It just has a very slight haze. And the Austrians, because we're right on the border, come to the beer garden and drink it and say, this is not a Zwicker. Yes, it is. That's a real Zwicker.
It actually is.
Not the orange juice you guys are drinking, So.
Yeah. That's funny. All right. Well, thank you for tackling that for me. I just was very curious, like I said, because Matt and I have both joked about, haze in beer not being a new thing, really. Just sort of how we do it now might be a bit.
Yeah. It's crazy to see it back, because it was like, I remember coming, come back every year once or twice, and the beers were getting brighter and brighter. It's like, finally they figured it out.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's like,
Yeah. Okay. But in our defense, I feel that at the same time, we're experiencing a lager beer renaissance among craft brewers too. And I'm really enjoying American lager and craft beer. And I'll be honest, in my career, that wasn't always the case. Early when I started this back in 2005, it was pretty hit or miss when I was going around trying craft lagers. And now I'm finding that craft brewers here have just really learned the techniques to make some great beer now. So we're simultaneously, it's not as popular, of course, but I think, right, Matt, we're seeing this lager resurgence.
Yeah. And we're at that point now where enough brewers are making great beers that we just need to get in front of consumers, because I think there will be, the pendulum always swings, back to drinkability and balance, and there are brewers that are on point. And I think that's why this discussion of lager was rather timely, because there's so many curious brewers out there who are refining their art. So it's awesome.
No, I think it's great. It's exciting. And well, when all this started, the whole beer renaissance back in the late 70s and early 80s, of course the people's perception of lager, not many people had traveled to Europe, I would say, and of course you had just the industrial lager beers, which still have their place, but so people had an idea that lager was just watery fizz, and that's why ales or top fermented beers, they just struck a chord with people. It's like, oh wow, so beer can taste like this as well. But it's great to see people getting back to the subtleties, and I mean, that's one of the great things about lager, is it's very subtle and very, and very delicate, and actually difficult to replicate time and time again. And that's something that any I think consumers and drinkers expect from a beer. They know it's a natural product, but they want it to be consistently reliable, or reliably consistent all the time.
And it's getting there. I had mentioned you before the show, Matt. I'm not sure you were on here yet, but I was having a Kolsch from Heater Allen, which they just call Das Bier. It's the name of this Kolsch. But great lager breweries, Heater Allen is. And of course, Pivo, always been one of my favorites.
Great one,
yeah. There you go. All right, guys. Well, Eric, thank you so much once again for being on the show with us and spending all this time on your vacation. Safe travels home, and we wish you luck there. But yeah, thanks for just sharing all this great information with us. I appreciate it.
You bet. Well, thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.
You got it.
Hope to see you soon.
Yes, sir. All right, Matt, we'll be back for another episode soon. I'm not even sure what we have coming down the pipe next, but I know that we're going to talk to some of the other brewers at Firestone Walker soon, out of the barrel house that you guys do, and some from I've been drinking the Propagator series once again. So we've got more for you on the Beer Before Glory podcast with Matt Brynildson from Firestone Walker. I'm Justin Crosley. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves and your beer.
Cheers.
Cheers.